Who was Bakioki? Do you think he was a Jesuit? I know some people that do. He always claimed he wasn't. But here he is in all his Catholic regalia giving the papal blessing sign. Maybe he just thought this was funny and would be a good joke. Well, regardless, I think it was poor judgment on his part to take such a picture. Maybe the question shouldn't be, was he a Jesuit? Maybe the question should be, does it matter? Or what? Consider this. Hour by hour, day by day, week by week, month by month, for years, he sat at the feet of Jesuits and learned by them. Tell me, as human beings, can we do such a thing and come away unscathed? Won't our thinking become twisted? Won't we lose some of our true biblical foundations by doing such a thing? Haven't we been told that by beholding we will become changed? So sitting at the feet of such men, wouldn't we be changed in their likeness somewhat? And so we could be doing the work of a Jesuit without actually being a Jesuit. And when I look at some of his books, that's exactly what I see. I see little twists here and little twists there that just aren't right. Just like the work a Jesuit would do, they don't come in and try to change the whole religion. Their motto is be a Baptist to a Baptist, a Calvinist to a Calvinist, a Lutheran to a Lutheran, or an Adventist to an Adventist. But just change enough to confuse the minds of the people in the pew. Consider one of his most popular books, From Sabbath to Sunday. I was given that book as a new Adventist, and it just didn't sit right with me. For one thing, it uses too much higher criticism, like all his books do, which I think has no place in true biblical spirituality. As a follower of Christ, we don't have need of such theology. But besides that, in the back he says the Sabbath is a shadow. Well, the Sabbath is no shadow. The Sabbath is one of the 10 Commandments. Ellen White said, never call the Sabbath a shadow. When you start saying it's a shadow, you're going to run into all kinds of problems down the road, theologically. But he had little tweaks like that in all of his books, at least the ones I've looked at. Things such as it wasn't the ceremonial law nailed to the cross, but he says it was your guilt or something like that. And another place where he says in Revelation, where it says on the Lord's day, he says that probably really was Sunday. Or when he talks about wine, he talks about how some of the wine was real alcoholic wine. I think he even claims that maybe Christ made that. I can't remember. It's been a long time since I looked at a book. But he just has little things here and there. Well, why did I bring up Bakioki? Because people say, why do you do these videos? Why do you want to talk about this in church? Why do you always look for evil? Don't you know you'll be on and on, they claim this stuff. It's not that I'm looking for evil in the church. It's that it's there in your face, and I'm trying to warn people. You see, just like Bakioki, there's several youth that go to Andrews every year expecting to get a degree in religion and come out and be a pastor. And some of these youth are probably honest in heart when they begin, but by the time they get out, their thinking has been so twisted and deranged that they cannot even be a good pastor anymore. I've seen it time after time. I know who the teachers are there. I know what they teach. Like there's one class where they have two teachers, and they get up at the beginning of the semester or quarter, and they both tell the kids that there is a lot in the Bible that's not inspired and is not right. Now, when they do that the first day, the class erupts and everyone is arguing with these teachers saying, how can you say that, blah, blah, blah. But by the end of the class, the whole class, with the exception of maybe one or two, if they're really strong and they can withstand such pressure over the whole quarter, by the end of the quarter, the whole class is agreeing with these teachers. So this is what's going on at Andrews. Then they have to take a class in spiritual formations. Then they have to take a class by, well, Wooden's no longer there, but when he was there teaching them that Christ did not have a nature like ours, that you really couldn't stop your sin. So on and on, they have classes day by day, week by week, month by month, for 4 years or more, depending on if they're going to get their master's. And they're sitting at the feet of corrupt, apostate Adventist men, teaching them. How can our pastors come out unscathed? So then these pastors come to your church, and at this point they probably don't even know what's right and what's wrong and what to preach or anything else. And you sit at their feet week by week, month by month, year by year, and you think you're going to come out unscathed? That's not going to happen. That's why I make these videos. Not because of celebration music, not because of some church serving meat on holidays or giving meat out, which is happening more and more often now, or not because church is serving root beer and pizza for communion, which that has happened, or not because they're serving coffee and donuts on Sabbath school, or none of these other issues. These issues are abominable and disgraceful for us to be doing, but they're all symptom of what has happened in the church. They're all symptom of this church and the leadership being whitewashed sepulchres who are searching the world over to make one convert and making him twice the child of hell. And if you sit and listen to these men, you are going to lose your way. Ellen White was clear on this. Regardless of some influential self-supporting man claiming she said stay no matter what, she never said such thing. There's no such statement in the Bible. There's no such statement in the spirit of prophecy that says when they're up there teaching error that we have to go and listen to it. And for these men to say to do that, they are now standing under Satan's banner because they're forcing people to go and sit under Satan's banner. Now, I'm sorry, I respect some of these men, but they are sadly mistaken in this case. Here's what Ellen White said. I was shown the necessity of those who believe that we are having a last message of mercy, being separate from those who are daily imbibing new errors. I saw that neither young nor old should attend their meetings, for it is wrong to thus encourage them while they teach error that is a deadly poison to the soul, and teach for doctrines and commandments of men. The influence of such gatherings is not good. If God has delivered us from such darkness and error, we should stand fast in the liberty wherewith he has set us free and rejoice in the truth. God is displeased with us when we go to listen to error without being obliged to go. For unless he sends us to those meetings where error is forced home to the people by the power of the will, he will not keep us. The angels cease their watchful care over us, and we are left to the buffetings of the enemy, to be darkened and weakened by him and the power of his evil angels. And the light around us becomes contaminated with the darkness. I don't know how clearer you can get than that. People who do not want to accept this statement will say, well, she's writing for some other group. She was writing for Sunday Keeping Habits. She was writing for this. She was writing for that. The principle stands true. The light around us will become contaminated with the darkness being presented from the pulpit. We should not go unless God has specifically sent us. How much clearer can we get than this? Now, if we read the paragraph before this statement, I think it becomes even stronger. Even though she's talking about a group of people back then, I think the principle is the same today. Look, the different parties of professed Advent believers have each a little truth, but God has given all these truths to his children who are being prepared for the day of God. He has also given them truths that none of these parties know, neither will they understand. Things which are sealed up to them, the Lord has opened to those who will see and ready to understand. If God has any new light to communicate, he will let his chosen and beloved understand it without their going to have their minds enlightened by hearing those who are in darkness and error. There were a group of people who didn't accept more truth back then. Today, you have a whole structure who has turned their back on the truth. And they are in darkness, and they're training the new pastors as darkness, and they're coming out to the churches. And we have no right to go and listen to that. We shall have Satan and evil men to combat, but we also shall have messengers of light to help us. It is for us to gather up on our pathway all the rays of light and not listen to error. For if we do, we shall be turned away from the truth. We have no time to listen to fables. Why would you go listen to error every Sabbath just because they stuck a sign out front that says Seventh-day Adventist? Satan and the evil men we're going to come combat are going to be standing in our very pulpits. Ellen White said, "Many will stand in our pulpits with the torch of false prophecies and prophecy in their hands, kindled from the hellish torch of Satan." She didn't say here, go ahead and go listen to these men standing in the pulpits with the hellish torch of Satan. Then she would be contradicting the other part she said. It's clear that we have pastors and leaders standing with the hellish torch of Satan. Look, this happened before most of us were even on the scene. This goes all the way back to 1901, 1903, when the church decided to take a king instead of a prophet, just like Israel of old. So they elected A.G. Daniels, who brought in higher criticism and started planting doubt to the spirit of prophecy, and things went downhill from there. Although the church was still pretty good, you could go from church to church and get a pretty solid Adventist sermon, from what I understand. It was up and down through the early part of the 1900s, with one side fighting the other. Till 1950s, they came out with a book called Questions on Doctrine. And at that point, the leadership destroyed the pillars of Adventism. Now, some of you know about this, some have never heard this in your life. 1955, a book, Questions on Doctrine, was written in response to these two ecumenical Sunday keepers who came to our church and said, "Look, are you a cult? We're going to investigate whether you are a cult or not, because we're writing a book about cults." So Adventist leadership wrote this book trying to be just like the churches of the world, and in there they said Christ's nature is not like ours, that the atonement has nothing to do in the sanctuary, it was all done on the cross, that you cannot stop all your sins. There were several other things, but those were the main points that they destroyed in Adventism. There was such an outcry because there were still enough faithful in the 50s that they quit printing the book. However, if you get a copy of the Bible commentaries, the Adventist Bible commentaries, volume 7a, and turn to the back, read a little note there, you'll find out that that is the worst parts, a question on doctrines, put right in there like that is Ellen White saying it. When I was a new Adventist and I would read that, I would get so confused because there were a couple things that seemed like it was just the opposite of everything I'd studied coming into the church, everything that Ellen White wrote. Once I understood that they left out phrases or isolated sentences here and there to make it look a certain way, then the issues became clear. But the book Questions on Doctrine never went away. They just hid it. And then, of course, I forget when, it's a few years back now, 5, 6, 7, oh, it was maybe 8 years back, I can't remember. Andrews republished the book with a foreword by George Knight, no less. Just to show you where the book was really coming in from, this is a statement found in that book. We, the SDA Church, are one with our fellow Christian denominational groups in the great fundamentals of the faith once delivered to the saints. I'm sorry, I thought they were all Babylon and we were supposed to call them out of Babylon. We are not one with all the denominational groups. Well, after that happened in the 50s, we had a new generation of men come up that really got going in the 70s and the late 70s. Everyone knows about Desmond Ford because he lost his ministerial license. Most people don't know that he did not lose his church. The church kept him on until he retired just a few years ago, and now he's over in Australia as a teacher at the university there. I don't think he's full-time. I don't know exactly his position. But Venden, George Knight, Jack Sequeira, even Falkenberg was espousing the same ideas that Ford did. The only thing they didn't do is they didn't say, look, the logical conclusion of these ideas is there's no 1844. They try to marry the two, which of course does not work. Even the ecumenical men who came to the church in the 50s came back in the 80s. There was a television show, I believe it was called the Ackerman Show, something like that. And one of the men was on there, and they had a couple conference men on there, And they were blasting these conference men and said, hey, look, back in the 50s, you claimed this and this and this, which was the opposite of what your prophet had written, and yet you're still publishing and handing out her books. Which is it? Which do you believe? So even the Sunday keepers could see that there was this dual doctrine being taught in the Seventh-day Adventist Church, something that church members seem to be blind to. The conference truly has stepped off the foundation and they have made a new organization. It is not the people leaving the church making a new organization, it is the church itself that has. Back in 2000, at the GC session in Toronto, they had a painting commissioned. And here is a copy of that painting, or the picture of that painting. This is Christ. Now, notice his hands. Yes, they are given the papal blessing sign. Nobody's hands naturally fall that way. So you tell me, which God does the Seventh-day Adventist structure serve at this point? Who has taken them over? By the way, this painting is still hanging in the GC headquarters, last I heard. Make no mistake, people, the conference is in dark, dark apostasy. It will only get worse as time goes on. And you do not have to go to a building just because they stick a sign out front with the name Seventh-day Adventist on it. We offer insult to the Prince of Life and put him to shame before the synagogue of Satan and before the heavenly universe when we refuse to listen to his delegated messengers and instead listen to the agents of Satan who would draw the soul away from Christ. So long as one does this, he can find no hope or pardon, and he will finally lose all desire to be reconciled to God. People have this backwards because they think they have to go listen to his messengers in the church, but really, the messenger of the church is the agent of Satan, and they're refusing to listen to the delegated messengers, which are those who have broken away from the church and they're making home churches, or they're part of the historic movement, or they're part of the free Seventh-day Adventist movement. Those are his delegated messengers because they're still teaching true biblical principles. And I don't care how conservative you are, I don't care how healthy your diet may be or how long your dress may be, if you become convinced you still have to go support an abominable church, then you are not walking with God. I have had so many people try to convince me I'm wrong, or give me a DVD by Vite or Doug Batchelor or some other man. And these are ultra conservative people many times who see the problems and who can't stand the problems, but they go and support the church because they've been convinced that's the right thing to do. You are listening to the agents of Satan when you go, and you are refusing to listen to the delegated messengers out in the separated home churches where the work could have been done had the honest people just left and started home churches here and there. Here's another statement. I don't know how more clearly it can be said. Ellen White's talking about men who never knew Christ, didn't know God. And she says they can't give the right mold. They will never give the right mold to their minds. They have not grown up to the full stature of man. These are men who they've been in the church for years. She says they simply have the name Christian, but they're not fitted for the work of God, and never will be until they're born again. So they're men who take the name Christian. They claim to be Seventh-day Adventist, but they're teaching error. They're teaching false justification. They were teaching nonsense. They weren't born again. They didn't know themselves, and yet people looked up to them. And what was her response to this? What did she say to do in this case? Did she say, well, but we've got to stay unified, and so go and listen. Just, stay in the pew no matter what, even if you have to read your Bible? No, this is what she said. There is a little hope in one direction. Take the young men and women and place them where they will come as little in contact with our churches as possible. that the low grade of piety which is current in this day shall not leaven their ideas of what it means to be a Christian. Manuscript 12, page 333. You can read the whole thing there. See that I'm not taking anything out of context. And if the principle applied back then the principle applies today when they're teaching error. Look, do you think you should send your youth to Adventist school so they can get a so-called Christian education? And maybe they can end up like these Adventist youth. Here they are in an Islamic mosque. Yes, they traveled. Well, I guess they had to go overseas. I'm not sure where this place is, Arusha. And went to an Islamic mosque and participated in their Islamic prayers. That is disgraceful, despicable, and an insult to God. They are bowing down, facing the east, and praying to Satan. I don't know if our leadership is just completely oblivious to what the Bible has said for last days or not. But they apparently never read the Spirit of Prophecy anymore. Facing the east is talked about in Ezekiel chapter 9. And it's the end of days, and he says the ancient men are facing the east. That means leaders in the church are facing the east. By the way, that's a form of sun worship, Sunday. I believe our leadership will start keeping Sunday and try to convince the churches that we should have both days. Volume 5 of the Testimonies, page 209. The command is, go through the midst of the city, through the midst of Jerusalem, set a mark upon the foreheads of the men that sigh and that cry for all the abominations that be done in the midst thereof. These sighing, crying ones have been holding forth the words of life. They had reproved, counseled, and entreated. Some who had been dishonoring God repented and humbled their hearts before him. But the glory of the Lord had departed from Israel. Had departed from Israel. Had departed from who? Who's Israel? This is not ancient Israel she's talking about here. This is the last days. She's taking Ezekiel 9 and applying it to the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Who is modern Israel? But the glory of the Lord had departed from Israel, although many still continued the forms of religion. His power and presence was lacking. The Lord commissions his messengers, the men with slaughtering weapons in their hands. Go ye after him through the city and smite. Let not your eye spare, neither have ye pity. Slay utterly old and young, both maids and little children and women. But come not near any man upon who is the mark, and begin at my sanctuary. Then they began at the ancient men which were before the house. And in case you have any doubt who she's talking about, she clarifies it for you. Here we see that the church, the Lord's sanctuary, was the first to feel the stroke of the wrath of God. The ancient men, those to whom God had given great light, and who had stood as guardians of the spiritual interests of the people, had betrayed their trust. The church is not going through, people. That is a misunderstanding of one sentence taken out of context. And if you want to know more about that, watch my part 3 of my long video series. Or I think I put a short part on here also. I think it's called Short Church or something like that. The church that's going through is a church from Adam and Eve's time down to the end of faithful Christians. Not a structure, not some people with the name Seventh-day Adventist. And if you continue going to a structure just because they have a name out front, says Seventh-day Adventist, just because you think you need to keep going and you keep going and listen to a man who is guided by Satan, you will lose your way eventually. I've seen it happen over and over again. Satan is not dumb. He knows which little seeds to cast so they're planted in your brain. So in the day of temptation, they spring forth and cause you to fall. Brilliant, sparkling ideas often flash from a mind that is influenced by the great deceiver. Those who listen and acquiesce will become charmed, as Eve was charmed by the serpent's words. They cannot listen to charming philosophical speculations and at the same time keep the word of the living God clearly in mind. It's not going to happen. You're not superhuman. If you continue to listen to these men, you're going to be charmed just like Eve was charmed in the Garden of Adam. Do you really think you're stronger than she was? She stood in her perfect holiness, did not know sin, and yet, because she dabbled, she stayed around, she debated, she talked to Satan, we have everything we have today. And yet, so many think they can continue to go week after week and listen to a man holding the hellish torch of Satan. That's just mind-boggling to me. You need to get ready, and you're not going to get ready by going to such a church every week. Well, look, just a couple more quotes for those of you that still think, "Oh, we need unity. We need unity." We're never supposed to have unity with error. Even Ellen White said that. This is around the same time she wrote when she said, "Take the youth away from the churches." She made this statement. How can I say to our people, harmonize with those who advocate these wrong sentiments? How can I hold my peace and say unify? It's another way she's saying she can't say harmonize or unify with men teaching error. Of course not. God gives me the message. Beware of the leaven of those who have been destroying the faith of Seventh-day Adventists. There are those to whom I fear to write personally. God says, beware of the leaven of those who have stepped off the platform of truth. Beware of the leaven that some who have lost their connection with God will introduce, declaring their theories to be in harmony with that which Sister White has written. Manuscript Release, Volume 10, page 48. If that doesn't apply today, I don't know what does. Or we could simply just work in accordance with the Bible. We could just see what the Bible says and do what it says. And I think the Bible is pretty clear. Have no fellowship with the unfruitful works of darkness, but rather reprove them. Start reproving your church, and then go out and start a home church, because eventually they'll drive you out when you start reproving them. So why do I make these videos? To try and wake people up to the fact that what they behold is who they'll become. And in many, 99% of the cases right now in the Adventist churches, what they're beholding is false, hellish. It's a hellish torch from Satan.